I scored 1590 on the SAT, and in this video, I'll be doing a walkthrough of digital SAT practice test 4's reading and writing sections. With that being said, please like and subscribe, and let's go and get started with question 1. The spacecraft OSIRIS-REx briefly made contact with the asteroid 101955 Bennu in 2020. NASA scientist Daniela Della Guistina reports that despite facing the unexpected obstacle of a surface mostly covered in boulders, OSIRIS-REx successfully blank a sample of the surface, gathering pieces of it to bring back to Earth. So it successfully, I would assume, something along the lines of gathered a sample of the surface. We have option A, attached. That wouldn't make sense. B, collected would make sense in this case. If we take a look at C, followed, we wouldn't follow a sample of the surface or replace it. We would collect it. So our answer would have to be B. Question 2. Research conducted by planetary scientist Katarina Miljkovic suggests that the moon's surface may not accurately blank early impact events. When the moon was still forming, its surface was softer, and asteroid or meteorite impacts would have left less of an impression. Thus, evidence of early impacts may no longer be present. All right, well, if these evidence of early impacts may no longer be present, then we would say that the surface may not accurately represent or show early impacts, or present instead of represent would actually be better. So something along the lines of show or present would make sense. We have option A, reflect early impacts. Okay, that would make sense. In this case, reflect would basically be stating that it may not accurately show early impacts. That would make sense. B, receive. It wouldn't be receiving early impacts now in present day. C, evaluate. Well, we wouldn't say that it may not accurately evaluate early impact events. And then D, mimic. It's not going to be mimicking them. Okay, so A would have to be our answer there for number 2. Question 3. Handedness, a preferential use of either the right or left hand, typically is easy to observe in humans because the trait is present, but less blank in many other animals. Animal behavior researchers often employ tests specially designed to reveal individual animals' preferences for a certain hand or paw. All right, so we see that it's easy to observe in humans, but probably less easy to observe in many other animals. So we have option A, recognizable. That would make sense. It's less recognizable in many other animals. B, intriguing wouldn't make sense there. Significant wouldn't. Useful also would not. Okay, it would be less recognizable in other animals. So our answer would have to be A. Question 4. It is by no means blank to recognize the influence of Dutch painter H.B. on Ali Bani Sadar's painting. Indeed, Bani Sadar himself cites Bosch as an inspiration. However, some scholars have suggested that the ancient Mesopotamian poem Epic of Gilgamesh may have had a far greater impact on Bani Sadar's work. All right, well, we would say it is by no means probably like a reach or a stretch to recognize the influence of Dutch painter, of the influence here. Okay, now if we take a look at our options, we have A, substantial. We wouldn't say it's by no means substantial to recognize it, or satisfying. It is by no means unimportant. Well, in other words, that'd be saying that it is important. So that's no means would counteract the un. So we'd be saying that it is important to recognize the influence. Okay, that would make sense here. We have a D, appropriate. It is by no means appropriate. Well, we would say that it is appropriate because we go on to discuss how there actually was indeed this influence. So our answer would have to be answer choice C. Question 5. The following text is adapted from Susan Glaspell's 1912 short story Out There. An elderly shop owner is looking at a picture that he recently acquired and hopes to sell. It did seem that the picture failed to fit in with the rest of the shop. A persuasive young fellow who claimed he was closing out his stock let the old man have it for what he called a song. It was only a little out-of-the-way store which subsisted chiefly on the framing of pictures. The old man looked around at his views of the city, his pictures of cats and dogs, his flaming bits of landscape. Don't belong in here, he fumed. And yet the old man was secretly proud of his acquisition. There was hidden dignity in his scowling as he shuffled about, pondering the least ridiculous place for the picture. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? Option A, to reveal the shop owner's conflicted feelings about the new picture. Okay, well, we see that if we go up to the text, he states that the piece doesn't belong there with all his other pieces, but at the same time, he's secretly proud of his acquisition. Then it also goes on to state that he has a hidden dignity in his scowling as he shuffled about, pondering the least ridiculous place for the picture. Okay, so obviously we do see that there is conflicted feelings in the sense that he's proud and he has dignity in the work, but at the same time, it doesn't belong here, right? It says he fumed, he scowled. So there is indeed this confliction of feelings about the new picture. Okay, so our answer would have to be answer choice A. Question 6. The following text is from the 1923 poem Black Finger by Angela Weld Grimke. A black American writer, a cypress is a type of evergreen tree. I have just seen a most beautiful thing, slim and still against a gold sky, a straight black cypress, sensitive, exquisite, a black finger pointing upwards. Why, beautiful still finger, are you black? And why are you pointing upwards? Which choice best describes overall structure of the text? Well, we start by stating that she has seen a beautiful thing. Then we describe that slim and still. We describe more about sort of the background of it. We keep on continuing to describe it. Okay, and then we describe sort of where it's pointing, and then we ask these questions of why, beautiful still finger, are you black, and why are you pointing upwards? So we start out with pretty much a vivid description, and then we get into these questions. So we've got option A, the speaker assesses a natural phenomenon, then questions the accuracy of her assessment. No. C or B, the speaker describes a distinctive sight in nature. Okay, that part is true. Then ponders what meaning to attribute to that site. Yes, that's perfect. So our answer would have to be B. Question 7. The following text is from Walt Whitman's 1860 poem, Calamus 24. I hear it is charged against me that I seek to destroy institutions, but really I am neither for nor against institutions. What indeed have I in common with them, or what with the destruction of them? Only I will establish in the Manhattan and in every city of these states, inland and seaboard, and in the fields and woods, and above every keel, ship, little or large, that dents the water, without edifices or rules or trustees or any argument, the institution of the dear love of comrades. Which choice best describes the overall structure of the text? All right, so we have someone who's basically being charged with something, and then he's kind of giving his defense a little bit. Okay, he's neither for nor against institutions, and then he goes on to state that what indeed have I in common with them, or what with the destruction of them? Basically, kind of sounds like he might be impartial there. Then we go on. Only I will establish in the Manhattan and in every, and then he keeps going on talking about where he's going to establish this, the institution of the dear love of comrades. All right, so what describes the best overall structure? He starts out with kind of defense. We have option A, speaker questions an increasingly prevalent attitude. No. B, the speaker regrets his isolation from others. We never state that he regrets isolation. C, speaker concedes his personal shortcomings. No. D, speaker addresses a criticism leveled against him. Okay, that would make sense because if we go up here, we have, I hear it is charged against me that I seek to destroy institutions. Okay, so he is defending himself from that criticism against him. Then announces a grand ambition of his. Okay, his grand ambition, if we go up, is to establish pretty much everywhere the institution of the dear love of comrades. Okay, so D would be the perfect answer there. Question 8. The mimosa tree evolved in East Asia where the beetle Bt preys on its seeds. In 1785, mimosa trees were introduced to North America, far from any Bt. But evolutionary links between predators and their prey can persist across centuries and continents. Around 2001, Bt was introduced in southeastern North America, where the botanist Xu Mei Chang and colleagues had been monitoring mimosa trees. Within a year, 93% of the trees had been attacked by the beetles. Which choice best describes the function of the third sentence and the overall structure of the text? All right, well, here we see that we have a contrast. Okay, so we have but evolutionary links between predators and prey can persist across centuries and continents. And then after that, we go on to describe a couple centuries later, after 1785, we give an example of these evolutionary links persisting across time when we state that it was introduced into southeastern North America, where the botanist SMC and colleagues had been monitoring mimosa trees. Within a year, 93% of the trees have been attacked by the beetles. All right, so ultimately, we're making that transition and we're illustrating what was underlined there. So we have option A, it states the hypothesis. There is no hypothesis stated there. B, it presents a generalization that is exemplified by a discussion of the mimosa trees. And B, T. Yes, okay, the generalization there, if we go up, is that evolutionary links between predators and prey can persist across centuries and continent. That is not specific to the B. tyrannus. Okay, that's a generalization, and then we get that example that comes after it, so the answer there has to be B. Question 9, so we have text 1 and text 2. If you have a question with 2 texts, I recommend that you read through the question first. So we have based on the text, Howard Graeber and Wengrow. Text 2 most likely respond to conventional wisdom presented in text 1. So let's define the conventional wisdom in text 1 as we read through it. We have text 1, conventional wisdom, so I'll mark that right here with CW. Long held that human social systems evolved in stages, beginning with hunter-gatherers forming small bands of members with roughly equal status. The shift to agriculture about 12,000 years ago sparked population growth that led to the emergence of groups with hierarchical structures, associations of clans first, then chiefdoms, and finally bureaucratic states. So the conventional wisdom is right here. Long held that human social systems evolved in stages, beginning with hunter-gatherers forming small bands of members with roughly equal status. All right, now we got text 2. Which ultimately, if we take a look at our question, we want to know how they respond to that. Okay, so we have in a 2021 book, anthropologist David Graeber and archaeologist David Wengrow maintain that humans have always been socially flexible, alternately forming systems based on hierarchy and collective ones with decentralized leadership. The authors point to evidence that as far back as 50,000 years ago, some hunter-gatherers adjusted their social structure seasonally, at times dispersing in small groups, but also assembling into communities that included esteemed individuals. Okay, so how would they respond to that conventional wisdom? We have option A, by conceding the importance of hierarchical systems, but asserting the greater significance of decentralized collective societies. They're not asserting greater significance of one over the other, so we can get rid of A. B, by disputing the idea that developments in social structures have followed a linear progression through distinct stages. Okay, well, they are disputing the idea that it's a linear progression. Okay, and if we go up, we see that instead, they state that humans have always been socially flexible alternately. Okay, so not in a linear sort of progression. They're alternately forming systems based on hierarchy and collective ones with decentralized leadership. Okay, so it's not just a linear progression. So they are disputing that. So B looks really strong. We can take a quick look at C and D as well. We have by acknowledging that hierarchical roles likely weren't a part of social systems before the rise of agriculture. Well, they're never acknowledging that hierarchical roles likely weren't a part of social systems before the rise of agriculture. So we can get rid of C just because it's factually incorrect according to the text. There's no support for it. Then we have D, by challenging the assumption that groupings of hunter-gatherers were among the earliest forms of social structure. They're not challenging that, okay? Answer there would have to be answer choice B. Question 10. The following text is adapted from Frances Hodgkin Burnett's 1911 novel, The Secret Garden. Mary, a young girl, recently found an overgrown, hidden garden. Mary was an odd, determined little person, and now she had something interesting to be determined about. She was very much absorbed indeed. She worked and dug and pulled up weeds steadily, only becoming more pleased with her work every hour instead of tiring of it. It seemed to her like a fascinating sort of play. Which choice best describes or best states the main idea of the text? We've got option A, Mary hides in the garden to avoid doing her chores. There's no support for that. B, Mary is getting bored with pulling up so many weeds in the garden. Okay, we know that she's actually not getting bored of it. Okay, she continues to do it. It seemed to her like a fascinating sort of play. So B would be the opposite of what is really the case. We have C, Mary is clearing out the garden to create a space to play. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's for sure support for that because we have pulled up weeds steadily, only becoming more pleased with her work every hour instead of tiring of it. It seemed to her like a fascinating sort of play. The play is the pulling of the weeds itself, not clearing out to make a space to play. And then we have D, Mary feels very satisfied when she's taking care of the garden. Yes, to her it's a fascinating sort of play. Taking care of the garden is the play, and it does make her feel satisfied. If we go up, we have she works, dug up the weeds steadily, only becoming more pleased with her work. So pleased with her work would be what supports that very satisfied. Okay, so D would have to be our answer. Question 11. The following text is from Ezra Pound's 1909 poem Hymn 3, based on the work of Marcantonio Fulmino. As a fragile and lovely flower unfolds its gleaming foliage on the breast of the fostering earth, if the dew and the rain draw it forth, so doth my tender mind flourish. If it be fed with the sweet dew of the fostering spirit, lacking this, it beginneth straightway to languish, even as a flower born upon dry earth, if the dew and the rain attend it not. Based on the text, in what way is the human mind like a flower? Well, we have the flower unfolds its gleaming foliage on the breast of the fostering earth, if the dew and the rain draw it forth, so doth my tender mind flourish. Okay, so we have mind flourishing there. If it be fed with the sweet dew of the fostering spirit, lacking this, it beginneth straightway to languish. And even as the floweret born upon dry earth, if the dew and the rain tend it not. All right, so with option A, it becomes increasingly vigorous with the passage of time. B, it draws strength, changes in weather. Okay, there's no support for that. C, it requires proper nourishment in order to thrive. That would make sense because we have it be fed with the sweet dew of the fostering spirit. Lacking this, it beginneth straightway to languish, even as a flower born upon dry earth, if the dew and rain tend it not. Okay, so it requires proper nourishment in order to thrive. Looks like there could be some support for that. D, it preserves despite challenging circumstances. Doesn't look like we have support for that. Okay, here we have it beginneth straightway to languish. Okay, in other words, looks like it will ultimately wither and possibly die. Okay, so it doesn't look like it will preserve despite challenging circumstances. If we look at A, it becomes increasingly vigorous with the passage of time. Doesn't look like there's any support for that. Okay, our answer would have to be C. C has a lot of support for it from the text, as I've shown. Question 12. The following text is adapted from Jack London's 1903 novel, The Call of the Wild. Buck is a sled dog living with John Thornton in Yukon, Canada. Thornton alone held Buck. The rest of mankind was as nothing. Chance travelers might praise or pet him, but he was cold under it all, and from a too demonstrative man, he would get up and walk away. When Thornton's partners, Hans and Pete, arrived on the long-expected raft, Buck refused to notice them until he learned they were close to Thornton. After that, he tolerated them in a passive sort of way, accepting favors from them as though he favored them by accepting. Which choice best states the main idea of the text? Option A, Buck has become less social since he began living with Thornton. Well, it never says that he was social in the beginning before he started living with Thornton, so there's no support for A. B, Buck mistrusts humans and does his best to avoid them. Well, from this, okay, it sounds like he does still trust Thornton. Okay, the rest of mankind is what he doesn't trust. Okay, so we can't say that he mistrusts humans as a whole because we do have evidence that he trusts one human. And then we have Buck has been especially well liked by most of Thornton's friends. Well, we don't actually state if the friends do like him. Okay, we state that Buck doesn't like the friends, but we don't state whether or not the friends like Buck. We have Buck holds Thornton in higher regard than any other person. There's tons of support for that, as we see in the text. He just kind of tolerates everyone else in a passive way. Okay, but Thornton, if we go up to the first sentence, okay, Thornton alone held Buck, rest of mankind was nothing. Okay, so obviously very strong relationship between the dog, Buck, and Thornton. So our answer would have to be answer choice D. Question 13. U.S. states with the greatest number of organic farms in 2016. We have number of organic farms on our y-axis, and then we have all of these states listed out. Organic farming is a method of growing food that tries to reduce environmental harm by using natural forms of pest control and avoiding fertilizers made with synthetic materials. Organic farms are still a small fraction of the total farms in the United States, but they've been becoming more popular. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, in 2016, California had between 2,600 and 2,800 organic farms and blank. Which choice effectively uses data from the graph to complete the text? We have option A, Washington had between 600 and 800 organic farms. If we go up, we see that Washington did have between 600 and 800. So that is true factually. Let's take a look at our other options. We have New York had fewer than 800. If we go up, we see New York is at about 1,100, so that would be wrong. We have C, Wisconsin and Iowa each had between 12 and 1,400 organic farms. Wisconsin and Iowa, we see Iowa has less than that. We can get rid of option C, and then we take a look at D. We have Pennsylvania had more than 1,200. If we go up, we see Pennsylvania has about 800. Okay, so the only answer choice here that is correct according to the data is answer choice A, so A will have to be our right answer there. Question 14. Biologist Valentina Gomez Bahaman and her team have investigated two subspecies of the fork-tailed flycatcher bird that live in the same region in Colombia, but one subspecies migrates south for part of the year and the other doesn't. The researchers found that due to slight differences in feather shape, and since we have a discussion of differences, I'll underline that for now, the feathers of migratory fork-tailed flycatcher males make a sound during flight that is higher pitched than that made by the feathers of non-migratory males. The researchers hypothesized that fork-tailed flycatcher females are attracted to the specific sound made by the males of their own subspecies, and that over time, the females' preferences will drive further genetic and anatomical differences between the subspecies. Anytime you have a hypothesis or a conclusion, try to pay attention to it, maybe underline it. Okay, so in this case, we have which finding, if true, would most directly support their hypothesis. Okay, their hypothesis is that fork-tailed flycatcher females are attracted to the specific sound, which we state up here is higher pitched, okay, made by the males of their own species, and over time, females' preference will drive further genetic and anatomical divergence between the subspecies. We have option A, feathers located on the wings of migratory fork-tailed flycatchers have a narrower shape than those of the non-migratory bird, which allows them to fly long distances. We need to focus on the pitch of the noise. We have B, over several generations, the sound made by the feathers of migratory male fork flycatchers grows progressively higher pitched relative to that made by the feathers of non-migratory males. All right, so that would make sense because if ultimately the males' sounds are becoming more higher pitched, it's because they need to do that in order to attract women, in order to get reproductive success. Okay, so that would be supportive of the hypothesis that women are of this subspecies are going to be attracted to that specific sound, okay, of their own subspecies. Because as that sound, in order for then males to be reproductively successful, they need to have that higher pitch. Okay, so B looks extremely strong there. We can go ahead and circle that. We'll quickly take a look at C and D, and we can show why those are wrong. We have C, fork-tailed flycatchers communicate different messages to each other depending on whether their feathers create high-pitched or low-pitched sounds. Well, that's not talking at all about reproduction. Okay, so we can get rid of C. If we take a look at D, the breeding habits of the migratory and non-migratory fork-tailed flycatchers remain generally the same over several generations. That would be in contrast to what the hypothesis is stating, so our answer there would have to be B. Question 15, ablation rates for 3 elements in cosmic dust by dust source. Earth's atmosphere is bombarded by cosmic dust originating from several sources. Short-period cosmets are particles from the asteroid belt, Halley-type comets, and Oort cloud comets. Some of the dust material vaporizes in the atmosphere in a process called ablation, and the faster the particles move, the higher the rate of ablation. Astrophysicist Juan Diego Carrillo Sanchez led a team that calculated average ablation rates for elements in the dust, such as iron and potassium, and showed that material in a slower-moving SPC or AST dust has a lower rate than the same material and faster moving HTC or OCC dust. For example, whereas the average ablation rate for iron from AST dust is 28%, the average rate for blank. Okay, so we have to go up. We can go ahead and underline that they show that material in slower moving SPC or AST dust has a lower rate than the same material moving in faster, moving HTC or OCC. Okay, so where the average ablation rate for iron from AST is 28%, that has to be lower than the iron in HTC or OCC, okay, because we need to keep the same element, so we can get rid of sodium. Okay, and then it has to be from the HTC or OCC. Okay, we see we have SPC here, so we can get rid of that. Our answer would have to be C. We can quickly take a look at the table and just make sure it matches with the data. Okay, so if we go up, we see that we have iron, HTC, 90%. Okay, so our answer there would have to be answer choice C. Okay, so we can go ahead and circle C. Question 16. Art collectives like the United States and Vietnam-based collective, the Propeller Group, or Cuba's Los Carpinteros are groups of artists who agree to work together, perhaps for stylistic reasons or to advance together. Perhaps for stylistic reasons or to advance certain shared political ideals or to help mitigate the cost of supplies and studio space. Regardless of the reasons, art collectives usually involves some collaboration among the artists. Based on a recent series of interviews with various art collectives, an arts journalist claims that this can be difficult for artists who are often used to having sole control over their work. Which quotation from the interviews best illustrates the claim? The claim is right here, that this can be difficult for artists who are often used to having sole control over their work. Option A, the first collective I joined included many amazingly talented artists, and we enjoyed each other's company, but because we had a hard time sharing credit and responsibility for our work, the collective didn't last. Okay, that would seem like it's supportive. We can quickly take a look at B, C, and D as well. We have B, we work together, but that doesn't mean individual products are equally the work of all of us. Many of our projects are primarily the responsibility of whoever originally proposed work to the group. Okay, that's not really supportive. If we go up, we claim that this can be difficult for artists who are used to having sole control. Okay, if we go down to C, having worked as a member of a collective for several years, it's sometimes hard to recall what it was like to work alone without the collective support. Okay, this would be an opposite of our claim. We have D, sometimes an artist from outside the collective will choose to collaborate with us on a project, but all those projects fit within larger themes of the work collective does on its own. All right, so the only one here that is ultimately supporting the idea that it's hard for individuals who are used to having sole control over their work to work in collectives would be answer choice A. Okay, so A would be our answer there. Question 17. Mycorrhizal fungi in soil benefits many plants, substantially increasing the mass of some. A student conducted an experiment to illustrate this effect. The student chose 3 plant species for the experiment, including 2 that are mycorrhizal hosts, species known to benefit from mycorrhizal fungi, and 1 non-mycorrhizal species, a species that doesn't benefit from and may even be harmed by mycorrhizal fungi. The student then grew several plants from each species, both in soil containing mycorrhizal fungi and in soil that had been treated to kill mycorrhizal and other fungi. After several weeks, the student measured the plant's average mass and was surprised to discover that blank. All right, well, we need to understand what his initial hypothesis was. And the reason I say that is because he was surprised to discover. Okay, so we need to know what his expectation was. So let's go back and let's find what the expectation was. Okay, if it states it, I'm not sure it does. So we have the fungi benefits many plants, substantially increasing the mass of some. Okay, so presumably he would expect the mass to increase, so we'd probably be looking for a decrease in mass then. So if we look down, which choice most effectively uses data to complete the sentence? Okay, so he was surprised to discover. Let's see if we have mass decrease anywhere. Okay, we have average mass of plants grown in soil treated to kill the fungi, and the average mass of plants grown in soil containing the fungi. Okay, as we can see, it looks like the ones that have the fungi killed have much lower average mass, and then we have the mycorrhizal host. Okay, and in each of these we have yes, yes, and no. Okay, so let's take a look at what the mycorrhizal host has to do with this. If we go down, we've got right here. Okay, so student chose 3 plants for the experiment, including 2 that are mycorrhizal host species known to benefit from the fungi, and 1 a species that doesn't benefit from and may even be harmed by the fungi. Okay, so what we actually see is that the one that should be harmed by the fungi actually has a increase in mass. Okay, so that's what we're looking at there. That's what is unexpected here. So if we go down, we've got, and this will be broccoli, so not corn or marigold. Okay, so I'm going to start by looking at the broccoli, which is answer choice A. We have broccoli grown in soil containing mycorrhizal fungi had a slightly higher average mass than broccoli grown in soil that had been treated to kill fungi. A would have to be our answer there because it's the only one that is surprising our expectations. Okay, and the key part here is was surprised to discover by. Okay, so our answer would have to be A. Question 18. Several artworks found among the ruins of the ancient Roman city of Pompeii depict a female figure fishing with a cupid nearby. Some scholars have asserted that the figure is the goddess Venus, since she is known to have been linked with cupids in Roman culture, but University of Leicester archaeologist Carla Brain suggests that cupids may have also been associated with fishing generally. The fact that a cupid is shown near the female figure, therefore, option A is not conclusive evidence that the figure is Venus. B suggests that Venus was often depicted fishing. C eliminates the possibility that the figure is Venus, or D would be difficult to account for if the figure is not Venus. All right, well, we would say that it's not conclusive evidence that the figure is Venus. Okay, if we go up, we ultimately state that some scholars have asserted the figure is the goddess Venus since she is known to have been linked with cupids. Well, we wouldn't say that that's conclusive evidence that the figure is Venus, specifically because we state that cupids are generally associated with fishing. Okay, therefore, you could have a cupid there and have someone who is not Venus there just because cupids are associated with fishing. So A would have to be the answer there. Question 19. It looks like we are now on to the writing section. Okay, we have people's stories, so we'll need to know how many people there are, and then what is possessive. Okay, so we have literary agents estimate that more than half of all nonfiction books credited to a celebrity or other public figure are in fact written by ghostwriters, professional authors who are paid to write other people's. Okay, in this case, we would say that it's other people's is possessive, okay, because it is other people's stories. The other people do own the stories. Okay, so we have now between A and D. Now we need to know if the stories own anything. Okay, we have stories, but, okay, stories does not own anything, so we can get rid of D as well there, and our answer would have to be A. Question 20. Like other amphibians, the wood frog, RS, is unable to generate its own heat. So during periods of sub-freezing temperatures, and then we have some form of survive by producing large amounts of glucose, a sugar that helps prevent damaging ice from forming outside its cells. All right, well, we know we state the wood frog is unable to generate its own heat. So during periods of sub-freezing temperatures, we'd have to have it survived. We couldn't have would survive, survived, or had survived because we were stating that the frog survives. This needs to be present tense, okay? It's unable to generate its own heat, so it survives by producing large amounts of glucose. Okay, this needs to be present tense because this is occurring on a regular basis. It is consistently able to survive. Okay, this happens regularly because the frogs have this adaptation, right? They produce these large amounts of glucose. Okay, so our answer has to be D. Question 21. After a spate of illnesses as a child, Wilma Rudolph was told she might never walk again. Defying all odds, Rudolph didn't just walk. She ran fast during the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome. She won both the 100 and 200 meter dashes. Okay, that's an independent clause there. Before it, we also had an independent clause, and Rudolph didn't just walk, she ran. Okay, so two independent clauses that we're connecting. We can't use two M dashes like this. That would also indicate fast is non-essential, which it's not. Okay, if we take a look at our other options, all right, we can't just use an M dash like this to connect two independent clauses. Neither can we use a comma and then during. Okay, we would have to split this up with a period and then have during the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome, which is a introductory supplementary phrase, okay, that is being applied to the independent clause of she won both the 100 and 200 meter dashes and clinched first place for her team in the 4x100 meter relay. Okay, so our answer has to be answer choice D. Question 22. In many of her landscape paintings from the 1970s and 1980s, Lebanese-American artist Atal Adnan worked to capture the essence of California's fog-shrouded Mount Tamalpais region through abstraction, using splotches of color to represent the area's features. Interestingly, the triangle representing the mountain itself, okay, so the triangle representing the mountain itself, the triangle is still the subject. Okay, so the triangle singular. Here we have were, okay, that would both be, it'd be they have, they were, they are. These are all plural, but our subject is singular. Since our subject is singular, our answer would have to be D. Question 23. Seneca sculptor Mary Watt's blanket art comes in a range of shapes and sizes. In 2004, Watt sewed stripes of blankets together to craft a 10 by 13 inch sampler. All right, well, we see that this right here is an independent clause from Watt sewed strips of blankets together to craft a 10 by 13 inch sampler. Okay, so we have one independent clause there. Then we have later in 2014, she arranged folded blankets into large stacks and then cast them in bronze. That's another independent clause. To connect both of those, we would need more than just a comma. We'd have to have a comma in one of the fanboys, which we don't have. We can't just use two commas in later. Okay, because once again, if we were going to use a comma to split this, we would need a fanboy. Same problem that we have there in A. Okay, our answer would have to use that semicolon to connect these two independent clauses, so our answer would have to be B. Question 24. African-American Percy Julian was a scientist and entrepreneur whose work helped people around the world to see. Named in 1999 as one of the greatest achievements by a U.S. chemist in the past 100 years. Okay, here we have an introductory modifier. Named in 1999 as one of the greatest achievements by a U.S. chemist in the past 100 years. Okay, that's ultimately needs to be modifying the achievement, okay, because it's named as one of the greatest achievements by a U.S. chemist. Okay, so it can't be Julian himself, so we can get rid of A. If we look at B, we have a year in 1935, so we can get rid of that. If we look at C, we have Julian's 1935 synthesis of the alkaloid, and then we have D, the alkaloid itself. Okay, so it'd have to be his synthesis of the alkaloid, and then I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but whatever starts with P. Okay, ultimately it's because we have it's named as one of the greatest achievements by a U.S. chemist. Okay, so it has to be the achievement itself that is being modified, so our answer would have to be C. Question 25. The Arctic Alpine Botanic Garden in Norway and Jardim Botan in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil are two of the many botanical gardens around the world dedicated to growing diverse plant species. Okay, so and then we have both native and non-native, fostering scientific research and educating the public about conservation. All right, so it looks like we have a list here. Okay, so dedicated to growing diverse plant species is the first. Then we have both native and non-native. Okay, that is going to be going together with the species. Okay, that's a supplementary phrase that needs to be attached to the species. We can't split that supplementary phrase with a semicolon, so I'm gonna get rid of that. We need to have, let's see if we need any punctuation here. So we would have dedicated to growing diverse plant species, both native and non-native, and then fostering scientific research. Okay, keep in mind we do need to connect this with a semicolon. Of course, we're using a semicolon here for the list. So because of that, it looks like we're going to have answer choice B. Okay, we do need a comma for both native and non-native because that is going back to describe the species. So our answer would have to be B. Okay, both native and non-native is a supplementary phrase that needs to go and be attached to the species. So we need comma there, and then we need the semicolon here in order to maintain the parallelism with the rest of the list. So our answer has to be B. Question 26. Sociologist Elton Okinaka sits on the review board tasked with adding new sites to the Hawaii Register of Historic Places, which includes Polynalial, Hawaii, and Oiapoque Road Bridge. Oinaka doesn't make such decisions. Okay, doesn't make such decisions single-handedly. Okay, so that's an independent clause. And then we have, however, all historical designations must be approved by a group of 9 other experts from the fields of architecture, archaeology, history, and Hawaiian culture. Okay, so this, however, needs to be part of single-handedly, right? He doesn't make such decisions single-handedly, however. And then after that, we would have all historical decisions must be approved by the group. Okay, so we need, however, to stay with single-handedly. So ultimately, if we take a look at answer choice B, we can get rid of that because that semicolon would split, however, from single-handedly. And then if we take a look at option C, okay, keep in mind that we have 2 independent clauses that we are pairing together. We can't just split those with a comma and without a fanboy. Okay, we do need to have some punctuation. So we see our answer there would have to be answer choice A. We need to keep, however, okay, before the semicolon. And then we do need that semicolon still to split up these 2 independent clauses. So the answer there would have to be A. Question 27. In 1968, U.S. Congressman John Conyers introduced a bill to establish a national holiday in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The bill didn't make it to a vote, but Conyers was determined. He teamed up with Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman to be elected to Congress, and resubmitted the bill every session for the next 15 years. I would assume this is something like eventually in 1983 the bill passed. We have instead, likewise, finally, okay, finally and eventually pretty much mean the same thing. And then we have additionally, okay, finally would have to be our answer there because we're indicating that after 15 years, so it took a long time, it finally passed. Question 28. Geoscientists have long considered Hawaii's Mauna Loa volcano to be Earth's largest shield volcano by volume, measuring approximately 74,000 cubic kilometers. According to a so we have some sort of transition here. All right, so they have long considered this to be the largest shield volcano. And then we have, according to a 2020 study, we got Hawaii's shielded volcano is significantly larger, boasting a volume of 148,000 cubic kilometers. All right, so this is going to be a contrast. Okay, we first start by stating it's been long considered the largest, and then we state that it's actually not. So it wouldn't be secondly, it wouldn't be as a result of, or in other words, consequently. It's not in addition to something. This is a contrast. We held one belief for a long time, but then we realized, however, it's actually wrong. Okay, so our answer would have to be D to indicate that contrast. Question 29. Samuel Coleridge Taylor was a prominent classical music composer from England who toured the U.S. 3 times in the early 1900s. The child of a West African father and an English mother, Coleridge Taylor emphasized his mixed-race ancestry. For example, he referred to himself as Anglo-African. He incorporated the sounds of traditional African music into his classical music compositions. All right, so he emphasized his mixed-race ancestry. Then we give one example of that. And then down here, it looks like we're giving another example of that, where he incorporates the sounds of traditional African music into his classical music compositions. So we had one example, we're giving another one. So we have option A, in addition, looks super strong. We've got B, actually wouldn't make sense. We're not indicating a contrast. We can get rid of however. Regardless, we're not, without regard to something, okay, this would just be another example in addition to the previous example. So in addition would be perfect there, and A will be our answer. Question 30. In 2019, researcher Patricio Warado Gonzalez and food historian Nawal Nasrallah prepared a stew from a 4,000-year-old recipe found on a Mesopotamian clay tablet. When they tasted the dish, known as unwinding, they found it had a mild taste and inspired a sense of calm. The researchers, knowing that dishes were sometimes named after their intended effects, theorized that the dish's name, unwinding, referred to its function to help ancient dinners relax. All right, so this would be as a consequence, I believe, right? If we see that they found it had a mild taste, inspired a sense of calm, okay, and then we have, they knew this, okay, therefore they theorized something else. So this is as a result. Okay, so we have option A, therefore, or in other words, as a result. So that makes perfect sense. We have B, alternately. This isn't an alternative. It's not in spite of anything, so we can get rid of nevertheless. Okay, and it's not similar to what came before it or anything, so we can get rid of likewise. Our answer would have to be A to indicate that it is a consequential relationship. Question 31. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Chemical leavening agents cause carbon dioxide to be released within a liquid batter, making the batter rise as it bakes. Baking soda and baking powder are chemical leaving agents. Baking soda is a pure sodium bicarbonate. To produce carbon dioxide, baking soda needs to be mixed with liquid and an acidic ingredient such as honey. Baking powder is a mixture of sodium bicarbonate and an acid. To produce carbon dioxide, baking powder needs to be mixed with liquid, but not with an acidic ingredient. All right, so we've got to produce carbon dioxide, and then we're talking about baking soda and comparing it to baking powder. Let's look at our question. Student wants to emphasize the difference between baking soda and baking powder. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? All right, well, ultimately the big difference I'm seeing is whether or not it needs to be mixed with an acidic ingredient. They both have to be mixed with liquid. If we look here, we have baking soda as pure sodium bicarbonate. Down here we have its baking powder is a mixture of sodium bicarbonate and an acid. So those would look like the main difference there. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this. We've got option A, to make batters rise, bakers use chemical leavening agents such as these two. That's not talking about the differences. We got B, baking soda and baking powder are chemical leavening agents that when mixed with other ingredients cause carbon dioxide to be released within a batter. That's not emphasizing the differences. We have C, baking soda is a pure sodium bicarbonate and honey is a type of acidic ingredient. That's not comparing baking soda and baking powder. We have D, to produce carbon dioxide with a liquid batter, baking soda needs to be mixed with an acidic ingredient, whereas baking powder does not. Okay, that's emphasizing the difference between the two, so our answer would have to be D. Question 32. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Sue Sunny Park is a Korean-American artist who uses light as her primary medium of expression. She created her work Unwoven Light in 2013. Unwoven Light featured a chain link fence fitted with iridescent plexiglass tiles. When light passed through the fence, colorful prisms formed. The student wants to describe Unwoven Light to an audience unfamiliar with Sue Sunny Park. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? All right, so we need to describe Unwoven Light to an audience unfamiliar with the artist. So we have option A, Park's 2013 installation Unwoven Light, which included a chain link fence and iridescent tiles made from plexiglass, featured light as its primary medium of expression. All right, well, that does a good job of describing Unwoven Light. Now, to an audience unfamiliar with Sue Sunny Park. Well, ultimately, we don't really talk about Park at all, really. So it does a really good job of describing Unwoven Light, but doesn't introduce Sue Sunny Park at all. So we'll see if we have any answer choice that does a good job of both describing Unwoven Light and also introducing who Sue Sunny Park is, because A really doesn't introduce who she is. So let's go ahead and just mark this with sort of a neutral sign for now. Let's take a look at B. We have Korean-American light artist Sue Sunny Park created Unwoven Light in 2013. Okay, that's not describing the work at all. We've got C, the chain link fence in Sue Sunny Park's Unwoven Light was fitted with tiles. Okay, that gives a description of the work, but it doesn't give as good of a description as A, and it also doesn't introduce Sue Sunny Park, really. If we take a look at D, an Unwoven Light, a 2013 work by Korean-American artist Sue Sunny Park. So as we can see, we get a much better introduction of who the artist is. Light formed colorful prisms as it passed through a fence. Park had fitted with iridescent tiles. Okay, so in this case, we are introducing the artist to people who are unfamiliar with it, and we are also giving a description. So we can get rid of A since that does not introduce the artist properly. And we have answer choice D will have to be our answer because it's the only one that both describes Unwoven Light and also introduces Sue Sunny Park correctly. Question 33. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Cambodia's Angkor Wat was built in the 1100s to honor the Hindu god Vishnu. It has been a Buddhist temple since the 16th century. Decorrelation stretch analysis is a novel digital imaging technique that enhances the contrast between colors in a photograph. Archaeologist Noel Hidalgo Tan applied decoloration stretch analysis to photographs he had taken of Angkor Wat's plaster walls. Tan's analysis revealed hundreds of images to researchers. The student wants to present Tan's research to an audience unfamiliar with Angkor Wat. All right, well, ultimately, the main point of the analysis is that he's using this technique of decoloration stretch analysis to reveal hundreds of images. All right, so let's go ahead and down and take a look. We've got option A. Tan photographed Angkor Wat's plaster walls and then applied decoloration stretch analysis to the photographs. Okay, keep in mind that we want to present the research, okay, to an audience unfamiliar with Angkor Wat. Okay, so we would want to introduce Angkor Wat a little bit better than it is in A, and also that's really not describing the full extent of the research for the most part. We've got B, decoloration stretch analysis is a novel digital imaging technique that Tan used to enhance the contrast between colors in a photograph. That's not emphasizing his research. We get rid of B. Using a novel digital imaging technique, Tan revealed hundreds of images hidden on the walls of Angkor Wat, a Cambodian temple. Okay, so now we are describing what Angkor Wat is by stating that it's a Cambodian temple. So that satisfies the part of audience unfamiliar with Angkor Wat. Now, are we presenting Tan's research? Well, we talk about the technique that he used, and we talk about what it revealed. So it does a pretty good job of introducing the research as well. Take a quick look at D. Built to honor a Hindu god before becoming a Buddhist temple, Cambodia's Angkor Wat concealed the hundreds of images on its plaster walls. Well, that never talks about Tan's research. Okay, so our answer has to be C. Question 1. The fashion resale market in which consumers purchase secondhand clothing from stores and online sellers generated nearly $30 billion globally in 2019. Expecting to see continued growth, some analysts blank that revenues will more than double by 2028. Well, they wouldn't deny it. They're expecting this growth, so we can get rid of that. produced that revenues will more than double by 2028. That could potentially be the case if they're producing something like a financial spreadsheet, but that's not really indicated in this text, so that doesn't look very strong. If we take a look at C, worried, they're not worried that revenues will more than double. Predicted would make the most sense here rather than produced. Okay, they are predicting that revenues will more than double by 2028. This is a number that they are estimating for the future, so predicted would be the best answer choice there, so our answer has to be D. Question 2. Artificially delivering biomolecules to plant cells is an important component of protecting plants from pathogens, but it is difficult to transmit biomolecules through the layers of a plant cell wall. Marquita del Carpio Landry and her colleagues have shown that it may be possible to blank this problem by transmitting molecules through carbon nanotubes, which can cross cell walls. Okay, overcome would be the best answer there, right? And I was going to fill in this with overcome. I glanced down here. I saw that that was available in option D. Okay, there's probably maybe a couple other options of words that they could have put here, but overcome is by far the strongest. There are certain words that you'll see show up on the SAT reading and writing section fairly often, and overcome is one of them. So right there, that would be perfect. I'll quickly touch on A, B, and C as well here. Okay, we have option A, conceptualize. We wouldn't say that it may be possible to conceptualize this problem by transmitting molecules through carbon nanotubes. Okay, ultimately we're looking for a way to solve this problem, right? We state that it's difficult to transmit these biomolecules. Therefore, we need something that is stating that we can overcome that difficulty. Okay, we wouldn't be conceptualizing or neglecting anything. Okay, and we're not illustrating it. We are solving this difficulty. Okay, we are overcoming it. Okay, so our answer would have to be D. Question 3. Particle physicists like Ayanna Holloway Aker and Ida L. Kadra spent much of their time blank what is invisible to the naked eye. Using sophisticated technology, they closely examined the behavior of subatomic particles, the smallest detectable parts of matter. Okay, inspecting would make the most sense here, right? They spend much of their time inspecting what's invisible to the naked eye. They wouldn't be selecting what's invisible. They wouldn't be creating what's invisible. If something is naked to the human eye, it would be difficult to create, but that is even irrelevant because these are particle physicists. Okay, so they're going to spend much of their time inspecting the things that are invisible to the naked eye. Okay, we have here using sophisticated technology, they closely examine the behavior of subatomic particles. Once again, that would indicate that would be expecting there. Okay, so inspecting would have to be our answer there for number 3. Question 4. Anthropologist Christian J. Carlson and colleagues examined the fossilized clavicle and shoulder bones of a 3.6 million year old hominin known as Littlefoot. They found that these bones were blank, the clavicle and shoulder bones of modern apes that are frequent climbers, such as gorillas and chimpanzees, suggesting that Littlefoot had adapted to life in the trees. Okay, in this case, we would be basically stating that they were similar or maybe possibly identical to the clavicle and shoulder bones or of modern apes that are frequent climbers, or maybe they were sort of before that. So we have option A, surpassed by. We wouldn't state that they were surpassed by. Comparable to, okay, that'd be similar to the clavicle and shoulder bones. And keep in mind that we are then suggesting that Littlefoot had adapted to life in the trees. Okay, other animals that have adapted to life in the trees would be gorillas and chimpanzees. So therefore, we'd be suggesting that these are comparable in order to be able to draw that conclusion. Okay, we wouldn't be stating they're independent from. Okay, because if they were independent from, that wouldn't suggest that they had adapted to life in trees because they are different. And then obtained from, okay, we wouldn't say that they're obtained from, because ultimately, in order for it to be obtained from, we would have to know that the gorillas and chimpanzees came before the hominin. And also, in order for it to be, they obtained, it would say that they found that these bones were obtained from the clavicle and shoulder bones of modern apes that are frequent climbers. Okay, that would pretty much, in the context of this, be stating that they are identical and that they directly came from the clavicle and shoulder bones of modern apes that are frequent climbers, which is not the case. They're just stating that they are similar to. Okay, so our answer would have to be answer choice B. Question 5. Rhodea Wong, the protagonist of Samuel R. Delaney's 1966 novel Babel 17, is a poet, an occupation which, in Delaney's work, is not blank. Nearly a dozen of the characters that populate his novels are poets or writers. All right, I would assume that this would be not uncommon because we then talk about how it is very common. Okay, nearly a dozen of the characters that populate his novels are poets or writers. So something along the lines of uncommon. All right, because it's not uncommon, which indicate that it is common. So we have infallible, atypical. Okay, atypical would mean uncommon. Okay, it would mean that since we have this A out in front, we would get rid of that and get rid of not. Okay, because not atypical is the same as is typical. And then nearly a dozen of the characters that populate his novels are poets or writers. Obviously, that's probably going to be more than the general population. Because if you think about how many characters he has in his plays, the fact that there's nearly a dozen or 12 of them, you would assume the characters are probably something, I would guess, 100 or less. So obviously that put 12% of the characters being poets. So anyways, it would ultimately show that it's common. Okay, so our answer would have to be B. Question 6. For a 2020 exhibition, photographer and neurobiologist Okunola Jayofas blank a series of new images based on a series of alphabet posters from the 1970s known as the Black ABCs. I would assume this is something like created. We have which featured black children from Chicago. JFS photographed the now adult models and layered the photos over magnified images of the models' cells, resulting in what he called micro and macro portraiture. All right, well, we wouldn't say that he validated a series of new images. We would say that he, created looks really strong. We wouldn't say that he challenged a series of new images. Restored, okay, so between restored and created. So we've got a series of new images, okay? Since it's a series of new images based on a series of the alphabet posters, we wouldn't say that he restored because these are new. Okay, so that'd be the problem with restored, is that these are new, which indicates they are created, not restored. Answer has to be B. Question 7. In addition to being an accomplished psychologist himself, Francis Cecile Summer was a blank. The opportunity was a blank, increasing the opportunity for black students to study psychology, helping to found the psychology department at Howard University, a historically black university, in 1930. All right. So he was a proponent of increasing the opportunity. Well, that wouldn't really make sense because it says that he helped to found the psychology department. We probably want something stronger than that if possible. He can't be a beneficiary of something that he's creating or advocating for, distraction for. He's obviously not a distraction. He's pushing for it. Okay, was a supplement to increasing. We wouldn't say he was a supplement. Okay, so it would actually have to be proponent of. I was hoping we'd maybe have something stronger here, but we don't. Okay, so proponent of would make the most sense. Okay, in addition to being an accomplished psychologist himself, he was also a proponent of increasing the opportunity for black students to study psychology. And we see that he's a proponent of that because he helped to found the psychology department at Howard University. So A would have to be our answer there for number 7. Question 8, whether the reign of a French monarch such as Hugh Capet or Henry I was historically consequential or relatively uneventful, its trajectory was shaped by questions of legitimacy, and therefore cannot be understood without a corollary understanding of the factors that allowed the monarch to blank his right to hold the throne. I would assume this is something along the lines of to keep his right to hold the throne. Okay, if we take a look at our answer choices, we've got option A, reciprocate. Well, reciprocate would be something like going tit for tat or going back and forth with someone else or some other party. We see that that is not the case here. If we look at B, annotate. Annotate's like if you're reading a text and I was to write some notes in the margins or something. In this case, obviously that's not applicable. C, we have buttress. Now, obviously, this is a fairly complex word. Okay, so let's take a look at disengage instead as a good way to sort of prepare for if you did not understand the definition of a word, how do you approach it then? Okay, so in this case, we've already gotten it down to 2 answer choices. Okay, these 2 are fairly common knowledge as far as definitions. Buttress, not a very common word that most people know the definition of. Disengage, most people would know the definition of. So let's use that. Okay, so let's take a look at if that would make sense. We have whether the reign of a French monarch such as Hugh Capet or Henry I was historically consequential or relatively uneventful. Its trajectory was shaped by questions of legitimacy and therefore cannot be understood without a corollary understanding of the factors that allowed the monarch to blank his right to hold the throne. Well, there's questions about legitimacy, but he's keeping his right to hold the throne. Then ultimately, we know that it wouldn't make sense to disengage his right because we know he's keeping it. Disengage would pretty much be to give up his right to hold the throne. So that wouldn't make sense. That's kind of the opposite of what we'd be looking for. So we can get rid of D, and just by process of elimination, we'd see it have to be C. Now, if you know the definition of buttress, okay, then you would understand that in this context, it would essentially mean that it allowed the monarch to strengthen his right to hold the throne. But ultimately, you can still answer this even if you didn't know the definition of buttress just by using process of elimination. Question 9. Some bird species don't raise their own chicks. Instead, adult females lay their eggs in other nests next to another bird's own eggs. Female cuckoos have been seen quickly laying eggs in the nests of other bird species when those birds are out looking for food. After the eggs hatch, the non-cuckoo parents will typically raise the cuckoo chicks as if they were their own offspring, even if the cuckoos look very different from the other chicks. Which choice best describes the function of the underlined sentence in the text as the whole? All right. Well, ultimately, we have this claim up top, which is some bird species don't raise their own chicks. Okay, and then we give a little bit of more explanation on that. And now we're giving an example with the cuckoos. Okay, so we've got option A, introduces a physical feature of female cuckoos that's described later in the text. Okay, I'd be looking for something that's more so connecting to that earlier claim. Okay, we've got option B, describes the appearance of the cuckoo nests mentioned earlier in the text. Well, we're not actually mentioning the cuckoo nests earlier in the text, so we can get rid of B. If we look at C, we have it offers detail about how female cuckoos carry out the behavior discussed in the text. Okay, once again, I'm still kind of looking for something that's more specific to that claim. We've got D, it explains how other birds react to the female cuckoo behavior discussed in the text. All right, well, we know that the reaction of the other female cuckoos is actually in the next sentence. So the underlined sentence would be between A and C. So we have A, it introduces a physical feature of female cuckoos that's described later in the text. Well, if you look at the physical feature, I mean, unless it's referring to the action of quickly laying eggs, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a physical feature, but let's take a look at C. We have it offers a detail about how female cuckoos carry out the behavior discussed in the text. Okay, well, that makes way more sense than A, and that does actually refer back to our claim. Okay, because if we take a look, we see it that we have how they carry out the behavior discussed in the text. Well, that behavior is that claim that comes before it. Okay, and we're offering the detail of they quickly lay the eggs in the nests of other bird species when those birds are out looking for food. Okay, so in that case, that's offering the detail. So C would be our best answer there. C would have to be our answer for number 9. Question 10. Cats can judge unseen people's positions in space by the sound of their voices and thus react with surprise when the person calls to them from 2 different locations in a short span of time. Seihu Takagi and colleagues reached this conclusion. Okay, so anytime you have a conclusion or hypothesis, try to pay attention to it. By measuring cats' level of surprise based on their ear and head movements while the cats heard recordings and their owners' voices from 2 speakers spaced far apart. Cats exhibited a low level of surprise when owners' voices were played twice from the same speaker, but they showed a high level of surprise when the voice was played once each from the 2 different speakers. According to the text, how did the researcher determine the level of surprise displayed by the cats in the study? Okay, ultimately, I believe that it said that it was based on their sort of head and ear movements. Let me see if I can find the exact piece of text that states that. Okay, we've got based on their ear and head movements right here while the cats are recording. So based on their ear and head movements, very explicit evidence there. So we've got option A, they watched how each cat moved its ears and head. That's perfect. Answer would have to be A. Question 11. A student performs an experiment testing her hypothesis that a slightly acidic soil environment is more beneficial for the growth of the plant BRP. Okay, so ultimately, let's go ahead and underline our hypothesis here. Okay, a slightly acidic soil environment is more beneficial for the growth than a neutral soil environment. She plants 16 seeds of choysum in a mixture of equal amounts of coffee grounds, which are highly acidic, and potting soil, and another 16 seeds in potting soil without coffee grounds as the control for the experiment. The 2 groups of seeds were exposed to the same growing conditions and monitored for 3 weeks, which finding if true would most directly weaken the student's hypothesis. Okay, the hypothesis, keep in mind, slightly acidic soil is more beneficial for the growth. So if we're going to weaken that, we would need the ones that have the coffee grounds, which are highly acidic, we would need the ones that have the coffee grounds in order to have less growth, okay, because that would weaken our hypothesis. So we've got option A, the choysum planted in the soil without coffee grounds were significantly taller at the end of the experiment than the choysum planted in the mixture of soil and coffee grounds. That's perfect because we are showing then that those that are in a non-highly acidic environment are having larger growth, thus they are significantly taller than those that are in the neutral soil without the coffee grounds. Okay, so our answer would have to be answer choice A. Question 12. The Young Girl is a 1920 short story by Catherine Mansfield. In the story, the narrator takes an unnamed 17-year-old girl and her younger brother out for a meal. In describing the teenager, Mansfield frequently contrasts the character's pleasant appearance with her unpleasant attitude, as when Mansfield writes of the teenager, and then which quotation illustrates the claim. Keep in mind that the claim is that Mansfield frequently contrasts the character's pleasant appearance with her unpleasant attitude. Okay, so pleasant appearance, unpleasant attitude. We have, I heard her murmur, I can't bear flowers on a table. They had evidently been giving her intense pain, for she positively closed her eyes as I moved them away. Well, that's not really indicating that she has a pleasant appearance. Okay, so that's what I'm missing there in A. We do see that she has an unpleasant attitude, so I do see that part. So for now, I'm going to give that a minus, or actually, I think we can go ahead and get rid of it. Okay, ultimately, we're not indicating the first part, so let's go ahead and get rid of it. Let's take a look at B. While we waited, she took out a little gold powder box with a mirror in the lid, shook the poor little puff as though she loathed it, and dabbed her lovely nose. Okay, so we are indicating that she has a pleasant appearance, right? Lovely nose. She's taking out a powder box, but she has an unpleasant attitude. She shook the poor little puff as though she loathed it. Okay, so that's perfect. We're illustrating both parts of our question or of our prompt. Okay, we're showing that she frequently contrasts the character's pleasant attitude, okay, with the character's pleasant appearance with her unpleasant attitude. Okay, so our answer would have to be B. Question 13, economic policy uncertainty in the United Kingdom, 2005 to 2010. We have uncertainty on our y-axis. We've got some years and then some bar graphs there. Higher levels of public uncertainty about which economic policies a country will adopt can make planning difficult for businesses, but measure of such uncertainty have not tended to be very detailed. Recently, however, economist Sandil H. analyzed trends in news reports to derive measures not only for general economic policy uncertainty, but also for uncertainty related to specific areas of economic policy like tax or trade policy. One revelation of her work is that a general measure may not fully reflect uncertainty about specific areas of policy, as in the case of the United Kingdom, where general economic policy uncertainty, and then we're asked which choice effectively uses data from the graph to illustrate the claim. Let's go back and take a look at what our claim is. Okay, if we go down, we see that we have the claim of one revelation of her work is that a general measure may not fully reflect uncertainty about specific areas of policy, as in the case of the United Kingdom, where general economic policy, we go up, we've got general economic policy for the UK. Okay, keep in mind this is all in the UK, so general economic policy is the black graph. We see that it's not very correlated with these other two in 2010. And most of these other years, they're fairly similar, except for 2010, 2005, 2005 and 2006, but 2010 is the one where it's mostly, or the most uncorrelated with. So let's go ahead and take a look at our answer choices. We've got options A, B, C, and D. A states aligned closely with uncertainty about tax and public spending policy in 2005, but differed from uncertainty about tax and public spending policy by a large amount in 2009. What we actually see that in 2009, they are close together, so we can get rid of A based on that. Let's take a look at B. Was substantially lower than uncertainty about tax and public spending policy each year from 2005 to 2010. We see that that is not true according to the graph either. If we take a look at C, we've got reached its highest level between 2005 and 2010 in the same year. That uncertainty about trade policy and tax public spending policy reached their lowest levels. All right, well, if we take a look at the graph, okay, we see that we have the highest level between 2005 and 2010 in the same year. That uncertainty about trade and public policy reached their lowest level. Okay, we see that that is also not true according to the graph. This we can go ahead and get rid of C as well. If we take a look at D, was substantially lower than uncertainty about trade policy in 2005 and substantially higher than uncertainty about trade policy in 2010. Okay, that one is true according to data, so that D would have to be our answer there. It's true according to the data, and it is illustrating the claim. Question 14. Linguist Deborah Tinen has cautioned against framing contentious issues in terms of highly competitive perspectives, in terms of two highly competitive perspectives, such as pro versus con. According to Tenen, this debate-driven approach can strip issues of their complexity and when used in front of an audience can be less informative than the presentation of multiple perspectives in a non-competitive format. To test Tannen's hypothesis, students conducted a study in which they showed participants one of three different versions of local news commentary about the same issue. Each version featured a debate between two commentators with opposing views, a panel of three commentators with various views, or a single commentator. Which finding from the student study, if true, would most strongly support Tannen's hypothesis? Okay, keep in mind that the hypothesis is that students conducted, or to test the hypothesis. Okay, so up here, according to Tannen, this debate-driven approach can strip issues of their complexity, and when used in front of an audience can be less informative than the presentation of multiple perspectives in a non-competitive format. So that's the hypothesis there. I'll mark it with an H. Let's go down and try to find which findings would most strongly support that. So we've got option A. On average, participants perceived commentators in the debate as more knowledgeable about the issue than commentators in the panel. All right, well, that would ultimately go against, or that just doesn't support the hypothesis, so we can get rid of A. If we take a look at B, we have on average, participants perceived commentators in the panel as more knowledgeable about the issue than the single commentator. Okay, let's go back up and take a second look at the hypothesis. It states that they strip issues of their complexity when used in front of an audience. It's less informative than the presentation of multiple perspectives in a non-competitive. So this is really testing about the informativeness, essentially. So we've got option A. Okay, that's talking about how they're perceiving the commentators. We need to focus on the actual information that's retained by the audience. We've got B. Participants perceived commentators in the panel as more knowledgeable. It's not about perception. It's about how informed the participants become. Okay, so we can get rid of B. If we look at C, on average, participants who watched the panel correctly answered more questions about the issue than those who watched the debate or the single commentator did. Yes, it's ultimately about the participants' collection of information and how much information they're able to retain. It's not about any sort of perception of the commentators. If we look at D, on average, participants who watched the single commentator correctly answered more questions about the issue than those who watched the debate did. That would ultimately go against or disprove the hypothesis. We need to support the hypothesis. So the only answer choice that does that is answer choice C. Question 15. King Lear is a circa 1606 play by William Shakespeare. In the play, the character of King Lear attempts to test his three daughters' devotion to him. He later expresses regret for his actions, as is evident when he says of himself, "I am a man more sinned against than sinning." That wouldn't make sense. That's basically stating that people sin more against him than he sins himself. Okay, that's not really expressing regret for his actions. It's kind of the opposite of that in a way. We've got B, says during a growing storm, "This tempest will not give me leave to ponder on things would hurt me more." All right, so this tempest will not give me leave to ponder. That's not necessarily expressing regret for his actions. That's basically just stating that he wants a break from sort of the storm in order to go think. Okay, so I would get rid of B there. We got C, says to himself while striking his head, "Beat at this gate that let thy folly in and thy dear judgment out." Okay, well, that is regret over his actions. Okay, when he's striking his head and stating "beat at this gate," I would imagine that basically means that he's smashing himself on the head that let thy folly in. So that let thy foolishness in and that let judgment out. So he's obviously expressing regret for his actions. So C, extremely strong. We'll take a quick look at D as well. We have says of himself, "I will do such things, what they are yet, I know not, but they shall be the terrors of the earth." All right, well, when he says I will do such things, what they are yet, I know not. That's saying that he's going to do bad, but he doesn't know what it is yet. So it doesn't sound like he's actually committed these bad actions yet because he doesn't know what they are yet. Okay, and then he says, but they shall be the terrors of the earth. So he knows that he's going to do something bad, but it doesn't sound like he has done it yet. And answer choice C, he's already expressing regret for actions that he's already done. Okay, so C would have to be our answer there. Question 16. Many of William Shakespeare's tragedies address broad themes that still appeal to today's audiences. For instance, Romeo and Juliet, which is set in the Italy of Shakespeare's time, tackles the themes of parents versus children and love versus hate. And the play continues to be read and produced widely around the world. But understanding Shakespeare's so-called history plays can require a knowledge of several centuries of English history. Consequently, okay, now keep in mind, since it's consequently, it has to be a consequence of what came before. I see we have but here, so this is a contrast. Okay, and then we have understanding Shakespeare's so-called history plays can require a knowledge of several centuries of English history. So in particular here, we're talking about his history plays. Before, it looks like we were talking about his tragedies. Okay, if we go down here, we have the discussion of Romeo and Juliet as an example of one of the tragedies. We have the tragedies are addressing broad themes that still appeal to today's audiences. Now we're contrasting that with history plays, which require a knowledge of several centuries of English history. Okay, so we have option A, many theatergoers and readers today are likely to find Shakespeare's history plays less engaging than the tragedies. Okay, that would make sense because since they aren't going to understand them, they would be less engaging. Okay, so A looks very strong. We can quickly take a look at B, C, and D as well and discuss why they're either, maybe it makes us reevaluate A, but otherwise we'll talk about why they're wrong. We've got B, some of Shakespeare's tragedies are more relevant to today's audiences than 20th century plays. Well, that's not discussing the history plays that came in the sentence before it. And keep in mind here that we have consequently, indicating it's a consequence of what came before it in that previous sentence, which B does not address. If we take a look at C, Romeo and Juliet is the most thematically accessible of all Shakespeare's tragedies. We need to discuss those history plays once again because we have the transition word consequently, which means as a consequence of what came before it. And then D, experts in English history tend to prefer Shakespeare's history plays to his other works. Well, just because other people aren't going to understand the history plays doesn't mean that those who do understand the history plays will prefer them to his other works. Okay, so that would be a false conclusion to come to. Okay, so our answer there would have to be answer choice A. Question 17. Ancestral Puebloans, the civilization from which present-day Pueblo tribes descended, emerged as early as 1500 BCE in an area of what is now the southwestern United States, and dispersed suddenly in the late 1200s CE, abandoning established villages with systems for farming crops and turkeys. Recent analysis comparing turkey remains at Mesa Verde, one such village in southern Colorado, to samples from modern turkey populations in the Rio Grande Valley of north-central New Mexico determined that the latter birds descended in part from turkeys cultivated at Mesa Verde, with shared genetic markers appearing only after 1280. Thus, researchers concluded that what? Okay, so we've got these shared genetic markers appear only after 1280. If we go up here, we see that we've got ancestral Puebloans, Pueblo tribes descended, emerged in 1500 BCE and in an area as the southwestern United States, dispersed suddenly in the late 1200s, abandoning their villages for farming crops and turkeys. Recent analysis comparing turkey remains at Mesa Verde, one such village in southern Colorado, to samples from modern turkey populations in the Rio Grande of north-central New Mexico determined that the latter birds, okay, keep in mind that the latter would be the ones in New Mexico, descended in part from turkeys cultivated at Mesa Verde. Okay, I would assume then that this would be indicative that those who left Mesa Verde and dispersed then would have moved down into this Rio Grande Valley of central New Mexico. Okay, I would assume that that is what we're looking at in terms of the conclusion that would be drawn there. Let's go and take a look at option A. Conditions of the terrains in the Rio Grande Valley and Mesa Verde had greater similarities in the past than they do today. No, we've got B. Some ancestral Puebloans migrated to the Rio Grande Valley in the late 1200s and carried farming practices with them. Yes, okay, that has the most support from the text, as I discussed earlier. We can go ahead and take a look at C. Indigenous peoples living in the Rio Grande Valley primarily planted crops and did not cultivate turkeys before 1280. No, this is evidence of that migration from Colorado to New Mexico. We've got D. The ancestral Puebloans of Mesa Verde likely adopted the farming practices of indigenous peoples living in other regions. No, they would have brought these farming practices with them, so those turkeys would have came with them. Okay, so our answer would have to be answer choice B. Question 18. One challenge when researching whether holding elected office changes a person's behavior is the problem of ensuring that the experiment has an appropriate control group. To reveal the effect of holding office, researchers must compare people who hold elected office with people who do not hold office, but who are otherwise similar to the office holders. Since researchers are unable to control which politicians win elections, they therefore what? All right, well, keep in mind that since you can't control which politicians win elections, they already stated up here that the problem is ensuring that the experiment has an appropriate control group. Okay, so it looks like the variant, okay, so the non-control group is the actual politicians. So you would need normal people who are not politicians to compare them to. So you have option A, struggle to find valid data about the behavior of politicians who do not currently hold office. Well, this would be post or ex-politicians who were politicians in the past, which we're not actually trying to compare them to. We're trying to compare them to ordinary people. Okay, so we can get rid of A based on that. If we take a look at B, can only conduct valid studies with people who have previously held office rather than people who presently hold office. Well, once again, we're not trying to compare people who previously held office. We're trying to compare to regular people who did not hold office. So you have C, should select a control group of people who differ from the office holders in several significant ways. No. If you're trying to make a comparison, you need to control for as many variables as possible, which means you would be actually looking for people, not politicians, but people who are similar to the office holders, not who differ in several significant ways. You would look for ones who are similar in several significant ways. Now let's take a look at option D. We'll find it difficult to identify a group of people who can function as an appropriate control group for their studies. Yes, that's explicitly what we state in the beginning. We state that when researching, or one challenge when researching whether holding elected office changes a person's behavior is the problem of ensuring that the experiment has an appropriate control group, okay? That control group is ordinary people who are similar to the politicians, but who do not actually get elected into office. Okay, so we have option D. We'll find it difficult to identify a group of people who can function as an appropriate control group for their studies that is explicitly supported by the text. So D has to be the answer there. Question 19. In his groundbreaking book, Bengali Harlem and the Lost Histories of South Asian America, Vivek Bald uses newspaper articles, census records, ship logs, and memoirs to tell the blank who made New York City their home in the early 20th century. So to tell the stories. Okay, stories does not own anything. Okay, so since story does not own anything, our answer has to be C. Okay, so just based on that, we can go ahead and circle C for number 19. Question 20. In her two major series, Memory Test and Autobiography, painter Howardina Pindell explored themes of healing, self-discovery, and memory by cutting and sewing back together pieces of canvas and inserting personal artifacts, such as postcards, into some of the painting. All right, so ultimately when we say that they explored themes of, let's see, I'm assuming this is, okay, it's a she. Okay, so she explored themes of healing. Okay, we don't need any sort of punctuation. Okay, any em dash, any colon, any comma. Okay, you would just say of healing, self-discovery, and memory. Okay, ultimately, of is a preposition. Okay, you're just stating of healing. You're just entering right into the prepositional phrase. There's no need for any punctuation after of. Question 21. Both Sona C., an Indian American, and Danielle C., an African American, grew up frustrated by the lack of diverse characters in books for young people. In 2011, these two writers joined forces to found Cake Literary, a book packaging company that specializes in the creation and promotion of stories told from diverse perspectives for children and young adults. All right, well, ultimately, we know that a book packaging company is describing Cake Literary, and we also recognize that we have specializes in the creation and promotion of stories told from diverse perspectives for children and young adults. Okay, and that is describing the book packaging company. So since we are describing the book packaging company, which is a noun, okay, we need to connect this with that, which is a relative pronoun. Okay, keep in mind that's referring back to a book packaging company. Now, we don't need to have any commas, okay, because we are using that, which is a relative pronoun. Okay, so we can go ahead and get rid of D, get rid of A. Okay, and obviously we do need to have that relative pronoun in order for this to make sense, because otherwise we would just have a book packaging company specializes in, okay, a book packaging company that specializes in. Okay, and we need that because we have to keep in mind still that everything after this comma is referring back to Cake Literary. Okay, so what is Cake Literary? It's a book packaging company that specializes in the creation and promotion of stories told from diverse perspectives for children and young adults. So our answer has to be answer choice B. Question 22. A study led by scientist Rebecca Kirby at the University of Wisconsin-Madison found that black bears that eat human food before hibernation have increased levels of a rare carbon isotope, carbon-13, 13C, due to higher carbon-13 levels in corn and cane sugar. All right, so let's figure out what's non-essential here. So one thing that jumps out to me is in answer choice C, we have commas and parentheses. Okay, we only need parentheses there because otherwise we're just doubling the two things we could use for non-essential, which we can't do. You can only use one. In this case, we're using parentheses. The other thing is this comma here. Okay, I want to see if I have something non-essential, if this whole thing is non-essential. So to do that, I'm going to start from the beginning. I'll remove everything that's contained in here, and I'll see if it's non-essential. So we have a study led by scientist Rebecca Kirby at University of Wisconsin found that black bears that eat human food before hibernation have increased levels of a rare carbon isotope due to the higher carbon-13 levels in corn and cane sugar. So as you can see, if we remove everything from this comma to the end here, we see that we can remove it and it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. So it is non-essential. So since it's non-essential and we start it with a comma, we'll have to end it with a comma as well, which means we can get rid of answer choices A, answer choice B, and we're left with answer choice D. Okay, as you can see in answer choice D, we use these parentheses in order to indicate the abbreviation for carbon-13, so that's all good. And we also close off this non-essential phrase or clause that we start in with that comma there. We close off that non-essential part right here, okay, with that comma. Okay, so our answer there has to be answer choice D. Question 23. In 2010, archaeologist Noel Hidalgo Tan was visiting the 12th century temple of Angkor Wat in Cambodia when he noticed markings of red paint on the temple walls. Okay, so he was visiting when he noticed this. That's a full sentence, so we've got independent clause up to walls. And then we have, with the help of digital imaging techniques, he discovered the markings to be part of an elaborate mural painting containing over 200 paintings. Okay, so we have two independent clauses. Okay, first one ends at walls, second one starts with, and we also have to keep in mind that with is not an independent clause on its own. Okay, it's an introductory dependent clause. With the help of digital imaging techniques, he. Okay, so introductory dependent clause that is ultimately describing he. Okay, so if we take a look at our options, we can't connect with just a comma because we have two independent clauses. We need some punctuation, right? We can't connect two independent clauses with nothing. Okay, can't connect two independent clauses with nothing. Okay, so we got to split this into two sentences since we have two independent clauses. So our answer would have to be answer choice D. Question 24. Working from an earlier discovery of Charpentier's, chemists Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, and then we have non-essential winners of the 2020 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. So I'll just get rid of that. So go back to the beginning. Working from an earlier discovery of Charpentier's, chemists Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna recreated and then reprogrammed the so-called genetic scissors of a species of DNA cleaving bacteria, and we have some form of a verb. One thing I want to point out is that the subject here is the genetic scissors. Okay, you have of a species of DNA cleaving bacteria. Since you have of, that's a preposition. Okay, so you would remove that prepositional phrase to get back to your subject, which is genetic scissors. So from here, let's go ahead and read through with everything crossed out. We'll skip over. We've got working from an earlier discovery of Charpentier's, chemists Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna recreated and then reprogrammed. Those are both past tense. The so-called genetic scissors. We wouldn't say forging a tool that is revolutionizing the field of gene technology. Okay, these are the actions that occurred. Okay, these are actions recreated and then reprogrammed, the so-called genetic scissors. Okay, why did they do these actions? Well, they did these actions to forge a tool, not, the genetic scissors aren't forging the tool. Okay, they did these actions. Okay, they recreated and then reprogrammed the so-called genetic scissors. Why? To forge a tool. So it wouldn't be forged or forging and forging. It would be to forge a tool. Okay, so our answer would have to be A. Question 25. In 2016, engineer Vanessa Galvez oversaw the installation of 164 bioswales, vegetated channels designed to absorb and divert stormwater along the streets of Queens, New York, by reducing runoff flowing into city sewers. Okay, so this is going to be an introductory modifier, so it needs to modify the correct thing. So by reducing the runoff flowing into city sewers, the mitigation of both street flooding and the resulting pollution of nearby waterways has been achieved by bioswales. Okay, bioswales is the subject that's being modified here. Okay, bioswales. So that should be what comes after. Okay, so we've got option B. The bioswales have mitigated both street flooding and the resulting pollution of nearby waterways. Okay, let's quickly make sure that we do have the correct subject. Okay, the installation of 164 bioswales. Okay, so that would be the right subject. So B, that looks really good. I'll quickly check C and D. We've got C, the bioswales mitigation. Okay, by reducing the runoff. Okay, ultimately, it's not the bioswales mitigation of street flooding and pollution. It's the bioswales themselves that are reducing the runoff. Okay, so what is reducing the runoff flowing into city sewers? It is the bioswales. It's not both street flooding and resulting migration. It is the bioswales. Okay, so this is an introductory modifier. You need to have whatever comes after that comma then be what is being modified. In this case, that's whatever is reducing the runoff flowing into city sewers, which is the bioswale, so answer has to be B. Question 26. A study published by Rice University geoscientist Ming Tang in 2019 offers a new explanation for the origin of Earth's continents. All right, so that's an independent clause up to continents. Then we have geological structures called arcs, towering ridges that form when a dense oceanic plate subducts under a less dense continental plate, melts in the mantle below, and then rises and bursts through the continental crust. Okay, so everything after this comma is describing these geological structures called arcs. Okay, geological structures called arcs is not an independent clause. Okay, that is a supplementary phrase. So that can't stand on its own. So we can't connect it with a period. We cannot connect it with a semicolon either. Okay, so then we have either a colon or nothing. Well, we have to have something there. Okay, we can't just have nothing because we do have this supplementary phrase we have to connect. Now, one thing I'll point out here is that we have this, everything after this colon, right? Geological structures called arcs, towering ridges that form when a dense oceanic plate subducts under a less dense continental plate, melts in the mantle below, and then rises and bursts through the continental crust above. Well, that's illustrating this explanation. Okay, it says that the study offers a new explanation for the origin of Earth's continents, and then we go on to give sort of more information about that explanation. When you're in a scenario where what comes after the colon is illustrating what came before it, okay, that's what you would want. That's pretty much what the purpose of a colon is where what comes after is illustrating the idea that came before it, which it is in this case, okay? Now, keep in mind, you cannot use A because you have to connect this supplementary phrase to the independent clause somehow, and you can't do that without a colon. So our answer there has to be B. Question 27. During a 2021 launch, Rocket Lab's Electron rocket experienced an unexpected failure. Its second stage booster shut down suddenly after ignition. Instead of downplaying the incident, Rocket Lab CEO publicly acknowledged what happened and apologized for the loss of the rocket's payload, which constituted 2 satellites. So we've got the option of afterward, which would make sense since we have a launch, which failed, and then we have a public statement about the failure of the launch. So afterward makes a ton of sense. Let's take a look at additionally. Well, it's not in addition to the launch. Okay, the launch happens, and then we have to apologize for it. It's not in addition. Then we have indeed. Okay, indeed would typically be used to add emphasis. Okay, in this case, we're not emphasizing what came before. We are addressing it after the fact. Okay, so A has a ton of evidence supporting it. Okay, C does not. If we look at D, similarly, well, we have a launch failure, and then we have someone apologizing for it. But those two things are not similar. Okay, this is just a sequence of events. One thing happens, thus the next thing happens. Okay, the next thing happens afterward. Okay, so our answer would have to be A. Question 28. When soil becomes contaminated by toxic metals, it can be removed from the ground and disposed of in a landfill. And then we have contaminated soil can be detoxified via P. Plants that can withstand high concentrations of metals absorb the pollutants and store them in their shoots, which are then cut off and safely disposed of, preserving the health of the plants. All right, so this is an option as far as how you can detoxify soil. Up here, we also have that it can be removed from the ground and disposed of in a landfill. So we have option 1 up here, and we have option 2 here. In order to connect them, we would want to show that it's an alternative. Okay, we have one option, and then an alternative to that option is the second option. So A would be our answer there for number 28. Question 29. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. The calendar used by most of the world, the Gregorian calendar, has 365 days. Because 365 days can't be divided evenly by 7, the number of days in a week, the calendar dates fall on a different day of the week each year. The Hank Henry Permanent Calendar, developed as an alternative to the Gregorian calendar, has 364 days. Because 364 can be divided evenly by 7, calendar dates fall on the same day of the week each year, which supports more predictable scheduling. The student wants to explain an advantage of the Hank Henry calendar. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from those who accomplish the goal? We've got option A, Gregorian calendar has 365, which is 1 day longer. That's not explaining an advantage. Always pay attention to this part. Okay, I'll scroll up a little bit so you can see a little bit better. Okay, always pay attention to this part of your prompt on questions where you're given a bunch of notes like this. Okay, that's always what you need to pay attention to. So we need to explain an advantage. B, adopting the Hank Henry Permanent Calendar would help solve a problem with the Gregorian calendar. Well, I'd prefer that we actually discuss what that problem is rather than just state that it would solve a problem. Okay, because we're not really explaining an advantage. The advantage, I guess, being that it solves a problem, but it's much better if we can explicitly state the problem. So I'll just mark this as neutral for now. And then C, designed so calendar dates would occur on the same day of the week each year. The Hank Henry calendar supports more predictable scheduling than does the Gregorian calendar. Okay, that's describing the advantage or explaining the advantage. So C is perfect. We'll take a quick look at D. D states the Hank Henry Permanent Calendar was developed as an alternative to the Gregorian calendar, which is currently the most used calendar in the world. That does not explain an advantage of it. The only one that explains an advantage of it is C, so C would have to be our answer there. Question 30. While researching a topic, a student's taking the following notes. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy is a nearly 1,000-year-old alliance of 6 native nations in the northeastern U.S. The members are bound by a centuries-old agreement known as the Great Law of Peace. Historian Bruce Johansen is one of several scholars who believe that the principles of the Great Law of Peace influenced the U.S. Constitution. This theory is called the influence theory. Johansen cites the fact that Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson both studied the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The student wants to present the influence theory to an audience unfamiliar with the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Which choice most effectively? Okay, so we got to present the influence theory to an audience unfamiliar with the Confederacy. We've got option A. Historian Bruce Johansen believes that the Great Law of Peace was very influential. Okay, that's ultimately not going to present the influence theory. That's just stating that someone believes it's influential. We've got B. The influence theory is supported by the fact that Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson both studied the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Okay, that's not introducing the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. If we're introducing something to an audience unfamiliar with, whoever or whatever, we want to explain, who that is or what that is, at least in some capacity. We've got C, the influence theory holds that the principles of the Great Law of Peace, a centuries-old agreement between binding 6 native nations in the northeastern U.S., influenced the U.S. Constitution. All right, well, ultimately, does that present the influence theory? Yes. Okay, now does it explain who the Haudenosaunee Confederacy is at all? Well, let's take a look. So we got influence theory holds the principle of Great Laws of Peace, centuries-old agreement binding 6 native nations in the northeastern U.S. influenced the U.S. Constitution. So it does explain who the Haudenosaunee Confederacy is. It doesn't name them, which isn't great, but it does do a pretty good job of everything for the most part. So I'll put a check by it for now. Let's take a look at D. Native people, including members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, influenced the founding of the U.S. in many different ways. That's not explaining the theory. Okay, so the only answer choice here that is ultimately presenting the influence theory and also doing at least a decent job of introducing the Wateronsay Confederacy is answer choice C. So even though it doesn't mention them by name, it does state that it was an agreement binding 6 native nations in the northeastern U.S., which is the Confederacy. Okay, so it does include it even though it's not by name. Okay, so our answer would have to be C. Question 31. While researching a topic, students taking the following notes. In 1999, astronomer Todd Henry studied the differences in surface temperature between the sun and nearby stars. His team mapped all the stars within 10 parsecs, approximately 200 trillion miles of the sun. The surface temperature of the sun is around 9,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which classifies it as a G star. 327 of the 357 stars in the study were classified as K or M stars, with surface temperatures under 8,900 degrees Fahrenheit, cooler than the sun. 11 of the 357 stars in the study were classified as A or F stars, with surface temperatures greater than 10,300 degrees Fahrenheit, the sun. All right, so ultimately we're kind of mapping out different temperatures of the sun here. So we've got student wants to emphasize how hot the sun is relative to nearby stars. Okay, let me go up to our support here. So how hot the sun is compared to other nearby stars. All right, well, we've got surface temperature of the sun is 9,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, we've got 327 of the 357 stars in the study were classified as being less than or being cooler than the sun, and only 11 of the 357 were hotter than the sun. So vast majority here are cooler than the sun. So we've got option A at around 9,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which classifies it as a G star. The sun is hotter than most, but not all of the stars within 10 parsecs of it. If we go up, let's make sure it's within 10 parsecs was the study. We see that it is, so that one looks really strong. We'll take a look at B, C, and D as well, though. We've got B. Astronomer Todd Henry determined that the sun at around 9,800 degrees Fahrenheit is a G star, and several other stars within the 10 parsec range are A or F. That's not emphasizing how hot the sun is, so that's why that one's wrong. Once again, I will point out that you should always pay attention to that first part of your prompt right here when you have a notes question, so the part I just underlined. Okay, and then we've got C. Of the 357 stars within 10 parsecs of the sun, 327 are classified as K or M, with surface temperatures under 3,800. Once again, that's not emphasizing how hot the sun is relative to nearby stars. D. While most of the stars within 10 parsecs of the sun are classified as K, M, A, or F, the sun is classified as a G star due to its surface temperature of 9,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, once again, that's not emphasizing how hot the sun is relative to nearby stars. Now, you could probably make the argument that maybe it is because if you had these notes, then it would be, but you have to keep in mind the reader doesn't have these notes. So because the reader doesn't have these notes, you need to recognize that. And, obviously that rules out D because they don't know what the temperatures are of these, K, M, A, or F. Okay, so if you look at option A at around 9,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which classifies as a G star, sun is hotter than most, but not all of the stars within 10 parsecs of it. Is that emphasizing how hot the sun is relative to nearby stars? Absolutely. So your answer there would have to be A. Question 32. While researching a topic, a student is taking the following notes. The Atlantic Monthly magazine was first published in 1857. The magazine focused on politics, art, and literature. In 2019, historian Catherine Halverson published the book Faraway Women in the Atlantic Monthly. Subject is female authors whose autobiographies appeared in the magazine in the early 1900s. One of the authors discussed is Juanita Harrison. Okay, the student wants to introduce Halverson's book to an audience already familiar with the Atlantic Monthly. So always pay attention to if someone's unfamiliar or is familiar. Okay, in this case, they are familiar with the Atlantic Monthly. Okay, so we can go down. Let's go and take a look at our question or our answer choices. We got Catherine Halverson's Faraway Women in the Atlantic Monthly discusses female authors whose autobiographies appeared in the magazine in the early 19. Okay, so that one to me looks pretty strong. Let me go back to the notes and just make sure that that's accurate. Okay, we've got in 2019, she published this book. Its subject is female authors whose autobiographies appeared in the magazine in the early 1900s. Okay, that looks good. One of the authors discussed is Juanita Harrison. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily say that we need to mention Harrison. Okay, so if we go down, option A looked good. I'll take a look at B, C, and D as well. We've got B, magazine called the Atlantic Monthly, referred to in Catherine's book title, was first published in 1857. They're already familiar with the Atlantic Monthly, so we don't need to mention when it's published. If you look at C, Faraway Women in the Atlantic Monthly features contributors to the Atlantic Monthly, first published in 1857 as a magazine focusing on politics, art. Once again, this is redundant because the audience already knows this, so we can get rid of C. D, an author discussed by Catherine Halverson is Juanita Harrison, whose autobiography appeared in the Atlantic Monthly in the early 1900s. Well, that's not describing the book. Okay, if we go up, we're asked to introduce the book. Okay, so I guess I should have said that's not introducing the book, and it's not. But option A is we introduce the book. People are already familiar with the Atlantic Monthly, so we don't need to talk about the year it was published or anything. And then it discusses female authors whose autobiographies appeared in the magazine in the early 1900s. Okay, so we're introducing the book. Audience is already familiar with the Atlantic Monthly. Answer there has to be A. Question 33. While researching a topic, a student is taking the following notes. The magnificent frigate bird is a species of seabird that feeds mainly on fish, tuna, squid, and other small sea animals. It is unusual among seabirds in that it doesn't dive into the water for prey. One way that it acquires food is by using its hook-tipped bill to snatch prey from the surface of the water. Another way it acquires food is by taking it from weaker birds by force. This behavior is known as kleptoparasitism. The student wants to emphasize the similarity between the two ways a magnificent frigate bird acquires food. Okay, so similarity between the two ways that it acquires food. Well, one way it acquires food is by using the hook-tipped bill to snatch prey from the surface of the water. Another way is by taking it from weaker birds by force. So in both cases, it's not diving into the water. Okay, it's just snatching it using force, essentially. So we've got option A. A magnificent frigate bird never dives into the water, instead using its hook-tipped bill to snatch prey from the surface. That is true. It does not mention that it takes it from the other birds. So I'm going to look for one that mentions that as well. So I'll leave this as neutral for now. We've got B. Neither of a magnificent frigate bird's two ways of acquiring food requires the bird to dive in the water. Okay, that's emphasizing a similarity between the two ways of acquiring food. Once again, I prefer that it mentions them, but it doesn't look like maybe it will end up doing that. Okay, if in this case with answer choice A, I'm actually going to go ahead and get rid of it now that I've seen B. And the reason why is we've got using its hook-tipped bill to snatch prey from the surface. That's only including one of the ways that it acquires food. And if we are going to include one, we should also be including the other. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of A based on that. Let's take a look at C. Of the magnificent frigates, two ways of acquiring food, only one is known as kleptoparasitism. Okay, we can get rid of that because it's not describing or emphasizing the similarity. If we look at D, in addition to snatching prey from the water with its hook-tipped bill, a magnificent frigate bird takes food from other birds by force. That's not emphasizing the similarity. We might mention those two, but we're not emphasizing the similarity between the two. Okay, so the only one that's ultimately emphasizing the similarity between the two is answer choice B. Neither of a magnificent frigate bird's two ways of acquiring food requires the bird to dive into the water. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and consider sending a super thanks to help support my channel. Additionally, please drop a comment below letting me know what videos you want me to make in the future. And if you are looking for additional educational services that I offer, please check out my website, haydenrhodea.com.